Hey everyone! Today we'll be following the defense of Castillo El Morro in Puerto Rico as the famous English sea captain Francis Drake tries to steal its treasure. March 1595. Our character Aurelio of San Juan, Puerto Rico left home and became a soldier in the Spanish army. He was ordered to serve in the Castillo San Felipe del Morro, a fort that he and his friends simply called El Morro, which was not far from the town. Aurelio was introduced to his duties and assigned his barracks, and quickly settled into military life. Back to him soon. Meanwhile, General Sancho Pardo Osorio set out from Havana, Cuba, with 2 million gold and silver pesos, intending to take the treasure to the king in Spain. However, in the Bermuda Channel, they encountered a damaging storm. April 9th, 1595. General Sancho's flagship limped into San Juan Bay, where the treasure was securely stashed in La Fortaleza till he could continue the voyage to Spain. August 28, 1595. Over in Great Britain, privateer Francis Drake set sail from Plymouth in England after Queen Elizabeth commissioned him to make a voyage attacking Spain's main source of wealth. Drake and his older cousin John Hawkins would be in command, and it was soon evident that they didn't get along too well. After much argument, it would be decided that the fleet would have a useless layover fighting in the Canaries, and another in Guadeloupe and the Virgin Islands. September 1595. Hearing of Drake's embarkment, Spain sent Admiral Pedro Tello de Guzman and 5 frigates to San Juan in an attempt to retrieve the bullion. 9 o'clock, November 20th, 1595. Aurelio was about to go to bed in his barracks when his friend Carlos, who worked in the forge, insisted on conversing. "So, Aurelio, did you happen to see the frigates in the harbor this evening?" "Yes, and I've been curious all day. You know any more than I do?" "Yep, because I was with the boarding party. We took important messages back to headquarters here." "Really? What are they about?" "Well, they're headed by this Admiral Tello, who's come to take all that gold to Spain that we hid in La Fortaleza back in April." "Did they bring any news of El Draque?" "Definitely, because guess what? When they were at Guadeloupe, they pilfered one of the English ships. And now we know for sure that El Draque is going to attack here soon." "Exciting, but I bet we'll be having to move tons of cannons tomorrow. I hope I can work in the kitchen with you." 3 o'clock, November 22nd, 1595. The English fleet anchored off Puerto Rico. John Hawkins wasn't feeling so good, and when they anchored, he died. The English captains prepared their forces for battle, while even higher-ranking captains had supper with Francis Drake in the cabin of his ship, the Defiance. The Spanish sunk 2 of their own ships in the entrance to the bay, creating a fleet in a bottle so that the English couldn't enter. Aurelio didn't get to work in the kitchen. Instead, his commanding officer placed him to help fire the cannons that had been maneuvered earlier. Meanwhile, other Spanish captains were busy positioning even more cannons, and in short, doing everything they could to cause the English to disanchor. Aiming for the flagship, they loaded and fired, missing the ships. Finally, a shot landed as planned, in the Defiance. Little did they know that the shot smashed into the cabin where the captains were dining, and several diners were fatally injured. 8 o'clock Thursday, November 23rd, 1595. Aurelio had been told to go to his shift as watchman. He strode to his garita, which was a circular sentry box with a domed roof. The previous watchman came out, saying, "Keep an eye on those English. They've moved near Isla de Cabras. Very close." Aurelio walked into the garita, took his place, and extended a telescope towards the English. Then he just kept lookout, waiting to report any significant movement he could detect of Drake's privateers. The sun had already set. Although the moon illuminated the sky, the inside of the garita was quite dark. Like usual, all was still on the ocean and in the garita, but there was a frenzy of activity in the fort and on all the ships. Aurelio's thoughts wandered. This fort had originally been built in 1539, on orders of King Charles V of Spain, for the defense and control of the San Juan harbor. It had been, at first, a small tower with 4 embrasures, but since then had been improved upon. Suddenly, his captain called loudly, "Alerta." This was to make sure all the sentries were awake, alert, and safe. Aurelio called back, "Alerta." Bored, he fidgeted with his sword. It was expensive, and made in Toledo. It was double-edged, and could almost bend in a half-circle. Sheathing his sword, he leaned on the window facing Drake's fleet, and wondered when the enemy would attack, and what role he would play in the defense. 10 o'clock, November 23rd, 1595. Aurelio noticed movement of the English. Looking through the telescope once again, he realized that 25 boats were headed towards the bay. Since they were boats and not ships, they could wiggle over the sunk ships. Each boat looked as if 60 privateers rowed in it. Aurelio ran to tell his superior the news, and he ran to tell his superior the news. Soon, shouted orders were cascading through the fort. Back in the garita, he watched as the enemy's boats tried to set fire to 2 of the Spanish frigates, and the ship's crews extinguished them. The stone fortification shook as cannon and musket fire was exchanged. Aurelio wanted to join his friends at the cannons, but knew his position as watchman was invaluable. The boats moved on to the other 3 ships. One frigate, the Magdalena, was set on fire for the 3rd time, but this time the sailors were unable to extinguish the flames. Bullets flew, stones flew, and some sailors flew into the water. However, the incinerating Magdalena lit up nearly the whole harbor, and Aurelio saw that it provided light enough for the artillerymen to aim well. For an hour the Magdalena burned furiously and the battle raged. In the melee it seemed as if the Spanish were winning. Finally, the English began a retreat, and disappeared into their ships. Aurelio kept guard for a while longer, thinking about the battle and half expecting Drake to launch another attack. 12 o'clock Friday, November 24th, 1595. Another watchman stepped into the garita's doorway, and realizing that his shift was over, Aurelio sleepily exchanged. He made his way back to his barracks, expecting to find Carlos. One glance in the room showed that some of the soldiers were exhausted and asleep, but others couldn't sleep due to the excitement of the battle. He noticed that Carlos was absent, and went to find him. The 2 were soon sitting in the forge, where they talked. "I figured you'd be here. Why aren't you in the barracks?" "I can't sleep." "Me either. Where were you during the battle?" "Working artillery. What do you think we did to the pirate?" "Looked to me like they lost maybe 400 men, and many more injured, as well as 10 boats. And when I returned to barracks, I passed by the infirmary. Not many of us were wounded, but they said about 40 were killed. And of course that sunk Magdalena. It seems we won. I guess Admiral Mendez will be happy. But what if El Draca tries again? I hope he won't, but if he does, he'll see a repeat of tonight." November 25th, 1595. Francis Drake and his fleet left the island, to continue a rampage through the Caribbean. Infuriated by the Spanish because they didn't fight in the open sea, he sailed to Riohacha, and then to Santa Marta, and then to the once prosperous Nombre de Dios. He found no gold in either of the 3, and burned them. December 20th, 1595. General Sancho's Spanish fleet departed from San Juan Bay with all its bullion, headed for Spain. January 28th, 1596. After a failed attempt to cross the Isthmus of Panama, Francis Drake contracted dysentery and died. He was buried at sea in full armor. To the English, he was a hero in service to the Queen, but to the Spanish, he was a thieving pirate.